If you think that America is heading down the wrong direction, you are correct. And we have the latest piece of evidence is Captain Marvel actor Annette Bening claiming that murder and body mutilation are basic human rights. That is indeed what she posits. Our celebrities are absolutely insane. They have lost any kind of moral high ground. They are completely immoral. They are advocating for the most depraved things. And what's even worse, they're proud of it. They're absolutely proud of advocating for these absolutely evil, heinous, and depraved actions. Let's get into this here. If you think this headline is hyperbolic, it is not. She spoke with the Hollywood Reporter's Chris Gardner, who asked, like everyone, I was home during the pandemic and I shifted to covering many virtual events. I remember seeing you pop up on several, first for the Point Foundation and later the Human Rights Campaign's Unite for Equality Live, speaking out on LGBTQ rights. This seemed new for you and feels like it was a thoughtful decision. Can you share a bit about why you decided to do that? This is what she said. For me, the real transition has happened as the right wing in the country has become more and more mobilized on misinforming people about the LGBTQ community. Absolutely false. They've done that to themselves. They've exposed what their own heinous agenda is, that they want to groom children. You have the San Francisco Gay Men's Choir. It's explicit in the lyrics, what they're doing. You have the Walt Disney Company actively opposing a bill trying to keep the teaching of gender identity and sexual orientation from being taught in classrooms for children from kindergarten through third grade. There are numerous other examples. Those are two of the biggest ones that pop in my mind off the top of my head. So I don't know how they're misinforming people when they are the ones telling you what they are indeed doing and what their agenda is. Nevertheless, Bening goes on and says they have been vilifying our community and creating problems that do not exist, and creating and sowing hate and fear as a way of rallying their base. Now, exposing the truth of these heinous ideologies, these disordered lifestyles, is not creating and sowing hate and fear. It is putting a light on it and showing it for what it truly is and how it destroys people's lives. And we need to pray for these people that they realize that they're primarily destroying their own lives and the people around them, and that they will repent from that and change their ways. Bening goes on and says that's obviously not new, and it's happened in the campaigns of the past, especially against gay people, but now it's transphobia and it's just rampant. They're doing it at a time when there are more and more trans people who are living openly, and who are our teachers, our writers, and our doctors. One of my most favorite doctors is a trans woman. I would never trust any doctor that believes in this ideology. Absolutely not. They clearly are denying basic scientific fact that men are men and women are women, and they cannot become the other sex. That's just impossible. It cannot happen. And any doctor claiming that, I would never, ever trust whatsoever, because they are denying basic truths, basic human truths. She goes on to share her wish. She wishes what I would wish for. What I would wish is for every person to have someone who is trans in their family, because once somebody you love is trans, then you get it. I would not wish that on my worst enemy. Utterly insane why you would wish that on someone. Wishing mental and spiritual disorders is not something you should want to wish on people. Terrible. She goes on and says, I have a trans son. She has a daughter, and she is such an inspiration to me. Certainly what's happening in the political world with trans people is so concerning and so dire. It's only going to get worse as we go into the election cycle. She then posited that murder and self-harm are basic human rights. Listen to this, because she indeed did say this. I was just at a wonderful event that the ACLU sponsored about bodily autonomy. It was about issues around abortion rights and trans rights. We were all there to talk about both, and it was awesome. We all want to be able to make the decisions about our bodies without the government interfering. Isn't that a basic human right? Absolutely not. Murdering an innocent child is not a basic human right. It is a grave, grave, grave sin. It is absolutely immoral. It is wrong. As far as self-mutilating, that is wrong too, because you are no longer respecting the body that God created you in. Absolutely wrong. And any doctor engaging in performing any kind of either chemical castration, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormone treatments, and then even surgeries, you should not be doing that, because that is wrong too. Because you're doing it for a purely cosmetic reason, because indeed you cannot change from being a man into a woman, and you cannot change from being a woman into a man. Gardner then asked transphobia. So I think it's very clear that she is claiming that murder and self-body mutilation, or just body mutilation in general, are basic human rights, and they are indeed not. And let's keep going here. Gardner then asked, transphobia has made its way into government and led to an attack on rights and access to medical care. How do you process what is happening? It's heartbreaking to me, the coldness and lack of compassion that so many people have, and they're trying to stir up all this fear in people about trans kids and parents, and they are trying to legislate that. Indeed, they should. The government's responsibility is protecting its citizenry, and they should indeed be legislating against murdering innocent children and having doctors perform heinous mutilation surgeries on children and adults. They definitely should be illegal. This should not be scary to anybody else. This is a private, legitimate, complex, deep, spiritual, physical, psychological experience that has to be respected and honored. Except that it is not private. It is very public, and they're trying to impose these beliefs on other people. So no, the government should be taking action against this stuff. After briefly discussing how her daughter, Kathleen Elizabeth, chose to identify as a man and falsely go by the name of Stephen, Bening confirmed she would continue to advocate for this immorality. She said, Gardner asked, will you continue to use your voice in the way that you have because of the threats that exist? Yes, and we all have a responsibility to protect and defend the rights of trans folks in our world. They're precious parts of our community. My parents are Republicans, and I was raised in a Republican household. My mother, who is now 94, was one of the first people to say, I used to have a beautiful granddaughter. Now I have a handsome grandson. It's that simple. It is absolutely not that simple. That is absolutely the wrong way to go about this. It's the wrong way to think about it. If you are thinking about it like that, you are endangering the people that you are encouraging to embrace this transgender ideology. I know I've talked about this in videos before, but I want to reiterate this because it is so wrong. We have Bishop Burbidge explaining in his letter at Catechesis on the Human Person and Gender Ideology. He says, we can never say something contrary to what we know to be true. To use names and pronouns that contradict the person's God-given identity is to speak falsely. In fact, he advises the faithful should avoid using gender-affirming terms or pronouns that convey approval of or reinforce the person's rejection of the truth. It is not harsh or judgmental to decline to use such language. He's right. He's not alone in his instruction. We have Archbishop Sample in his Catholic response to gender identity theory. He says, to some, supporting aspects of social transition may seem benign, even humane, such as using someone's preferred pronouns and actively affirming his or her perceived gender. However, while well-intentioned, this kind of endorsement may help shepherd a young person on a path of unnecessary medicalization. Social transition is often the first step toward hormones and surgery. As for Bening's claim that bodily autonomy in the form of abortion, the willful murder of an innocent child, and body mutilation are somehow human rights, the truth could not be further from her tongue. Catechism of the Catholic Church clearly instructs, since the first century, the Church has affirmed the moral evil of every procured abortion. This teaching has not changed and remains unchangeable. Direct abortion, that is to say abortion willed either as an end or a means, is gravely contrary to the moral law. It's because it's murder. It violates the Ten Commandments. The Catechism also says formal cooperation in an abortion constitutes a grave offense. Furthermore, it says, the inalienable right to life of every innocent human individual is a constitutive element of a civil society and its legislation. So Annette Bening is actually advocating against the basic human right of an individual, an unborn child's right to live, which they have. The inalienable rights of the person must be recognized and respected by civil society and the political authority. These human rights depend neither on single individuals nor on parents, nor do they represent a concession made by society and the state. They belong to human nature and are inherent in the person by virtue of the creative act from which the person took his origin. Among such fundamental rights, one should mention in this regard every human being's right to life and physical integrity from the moment of conception until death. It doesn't get any clearer than that. Regarding Benning's claim that butchering oneself is a human right, we should first look to how Archbishop Sample explains how the framework of transitioning operates. He says, the process of transition can take numerous forms, but the standard framework delineates 4 states of gender-affirming care for young people: social transition, puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgeries. Social transition includes adopting the name, pronouns, facilities use, clothing, and appearance that align with the subjective sense of gender. Puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries are all aspects of medical transition. The Archbishop further explains, saying, the process of medical transition for young people with gender incongruence often begins with puberty blockers that disrupt the process of sexual maturation. The purpose of this procedure is to halt the body's natural course of masculinization or feminization to facilitate subsequent cosmetic changes that can better approximate the appearance of the opposite sex. These changes most often involve taking cross-sex hormones and can also include surgeries that remove reproductive organs and alter genitalia. The Archbishop then asserts, it is important to emphasize that the desired effect of these procedures is cosmetic. They do not treat a clearly identified physiological condition. Because of this, medical transition, which can lead to permanent sterility and ongoing harm to the body, is incompatible with Catholic medical ethics as well as Catholic anthropology. With this definition, we can look at the Catechism and its instruction on respect for bodily integrity. It says, except when performed for strictly therapeutic medical reasons, directly intended amputations, mutilations, and sterilizations performed on innocent personas are against the moral law. It's very clear that murdering innocent children and mutilating and sterilizing oneself is not a human right. In fact, it is opposed to the moral law. And then I did want to get into this too, because I think this is actually a controversial take. I know a lot of people watch this channel are like libertarians, don't want the government getting involved in a lot of this stuff. Well, I actually have a different take on that. I do, as I've said already, the government should be getting involved, and this is part of Catholic social teaching as well. So as for Benning's fear that governments will begin taking action on these heinous actions, let's indeed hope they do, because it is their responsibility to do so. Catechism says, the moment a positive law deprives a category of human beings of the protection which civil legislation ought to accord them, the state is denying the equality of all before the law. When the state does not place its power at the service of the rights of each citizen, and in particular of the more vulnerable, the very foundations of a state based on law are undermined. As a consequence of the respect and protection which must be ensured for the unborn child from the moment of conception, the law must provide appropriate penal sanctions for every deliberate violation of the child's rights. So that's specifically talking about abortion and murdering unborn children, but I think you can apply that principle to other aspects of denying the right to life and protecting individuals. And so you can also see, while this instruction is right here, while this instruction is specifically for abortion, it's not hard to apply the same principle to gender-affirming care practices that violate the moral law. In fact, the Catechism also instructs political authorities are obliged to respect the fundamental rights of the human person. They will dispense justice humanely by respecting the rights of everyone, especially of families and the disadvantaged. And I do indeed think that if you do legislate this, it can, I think it can help and work to get people's a view of morality back on the right track. We see around us how legislating immorality leads people down these terrible paths. So obviously the opposite would be true, that if you do actually legislate things that are moral, people will more than likely start following them. Obviously you would need to enforce them as well. But I do think that there is a rule, that is part of the government's responsibility, and they should be doing that. The problem is they aren't doing that, and the people that are in charge are actively encouraging the opposite. And we have to work to change that. And that's what we're going to keep doing here.